We now continue with part 2 of habit and virtue. Now, Aristotle, as we saw, takes the view that one develops the virtues by engaging in particular activities. And so we know the means, but of course when one is trying to improve something or avoid getting worse at something, there's the obvious question of how does one measure progress? Now in the case of something like weightlifting, one can tell that one is becoming stronger because a person can lift more weights. Or someone is training doing speed work to get faster, she can tell that she's improving because she runs faster. So how do we tell in the case of ethics? Because unfortunately, we don't have like an Android or iPhone app that allows us to check for evil or good. And you can't like point at yourself and say, "Ooh, I'm becoming more good," or "Ooh, it looks like I'm backsliding into evil." So how do we tell? Well, according to Aristotle, the index of moral progress is pleasure and pain. Namely, as he sees it, good conduct lies in a proper attitude towards pleasure and pain. And so we can tell our dispositions based on how we feel about something, whether it hurts us or whether we enjoy it. For example, when it comes to bodily pleasures, if a person enjoys abstaining from bodily pleasures, they are temperate. If someone finds abstaining from them to be particularly annoying, they're licentious. In the case of facing danger, a person who is brave does so gladly, or at least without distress. They don't find it painful. But someone who is cowardly feels great distress in the face of danger. So, as Aristotle sees it, the way we sort of measure our progress is how we feel about what we do. If we feel good about doing good, then we're making progress. If we feel bad about doing bad, we're making progress. But if we feel bad about doing good and good about doing bad, then we are backsliding. So that's his measure of the index of moral progress. Now, interestingly, importantly enough, pain and pleasure serve many roles in his theory. The second is this. He claims it is with pleasure and pain that moral goodness is concerned. How so? Well, he claims, which seems sensible enough, is that pleasure can induce people to behave badly. Someone can be led astray by, sexual desire and have an affair, or they be led astray by the lure of ice cream and cookies and so forth, or someone could be led astray by some other thing they enjoy. So pleasure leads us to behave badly because many things that are bad for us are quite enjoyable. Now, in the case of pain can lead us to shrink away from the things we should do. Facing, danger with bravery can be something that someone's not inclined to do because bravery often hurts. And so pleasure can lead us to bad behavior, and pain can lead us away from good behavior. In this regard, Aristotle agrees with his mentor Plato. Plato said that true education is being trained from infancy to feel joy and grief at the right things. And he believes that every feeling and action is accompanied by either pleasure or pain, so virtue is concerned with both. And the way people become bad is because of pleasures or pain, and they do so by either shunning the wrong one or seeking the wrong one at the wrong times or in the wrong way. So basically, for Aristotle, pleasure and pain aren't inherently good or bad. It's where someone becomes bad by seeking the wrong pleasure, or seeking the wrong pleasure at the wrong time, or seeking the pleasure in the wrong way, or shunning, the wrong pleasure, or shunning a pleasure at the wrong time, or in the wrong way. Or likewise for pain, avoiding pain at the wrong time, or the wrong way, or the wrong sort of pain. So it's all about picking the right thing. Now, as he sees it, there are three factors that lead us to choice, to select something. Namely, the fine, the advantageous, and the pleasant. And there are three factors for avoidance that lead us away from things. The base, the harmful, and the painful. Now, he has yet another rule for pleasure and pain in his moral theory, namely, as standards of regulating actions. And he claims that pleasure and pain are the standards used to regulate actions. So feeling pleasure and pain rightly or wrongly affects our conduct. So our whole inquiry, as he sees it, must be concerned with these sensations. And he quotes the philosopher Heraclitus, who says, "It is hard to fight the emotions, and even harder to fight pleasure." Now, Aristotle, being Aristotle, believes, of course, that the harder way is always the concern of art and virtue, because, in a classic Aristotle view, success is better in the face of difficulty. So, the concern of morality, and for Aristotle, also political science, because as he sees it, the political science is the science of making people virtuous through the state. These must be concerned with both pleasures and pains. And so someone who treats them rightly will be good, and one who treats them wrongly will be bad. Now he next turns to sort of a classic objection against not only his theory, but one that was raised against other theories as well. And this is the problem. Aristotle says that we become virtuous by doing virtuous things. So we must perform virtuous actions to become virtuous. But here's the problem. If we already do what is virtuous, then we're already virtuous. So a person doesn't have to learn. And of course, if a person is not virtuous and can't do virtuous things, they'd never be able to do what is virtuous in order to learn. And so he runs into this problem. That is to say, if people must do virtuous things to become virtuous, how do they ever do that? Well, he draws an analogy here. It's, if people use words correctly or play music correctly, then they're already, it would seem, literate, if they can use words correctly, or musical, if they can already play music correctly. And of course, the problem is that if one learns music by playing music, if one can play music, one is already playing music, so one doesn't need to learn. And if one doesn't know how to play music, one cannot play music, so one cannot learn. So it seemed to have a similar problem. So how does Aristotle handle this problem? Well, since he brings it up, it's hardly surprised that he has a way or ways of countering it. His first reply is this, that this is not true even in the arts, that a person can put a few words together correctly by accident or with the aid of another. But one will only be literate if a person does so in a literate way, that is to say, in virtue of their own literacy. His next reply is this. He wants to distinguish between incidentally virtuous acts from true virtuous acts. Now, in the case of art, he believes, perhaps incorrectly, the works of art have merit in themselves. So it's enough to produce them with a certain quality. They simply have that particular quality, say beauty, or inspiring pity and fear, like in the case of a tragedy. Now, in the case of virtuous acts, they're not done in a just or temporal way merely because they have a certain quality. So it's not that they possess the quality of justice, or the quality of temperance, or the quality of courage. They're only virtuous if the agent takes action, the person doing it takes the action in a certain state, namely meeting three conditions. First, the person is going to know what he's doing, or she. Secondly, the person has to choose to do it, and chooses to do so for its own sake. And thirdly, does so from a fixed and permanent disposition. To use an example to illustrate this, think about generosity. In order to be generous, a person has to know what they're doing. So if someone gives somebody something and they think they're giving away something of little value, say like a dollar or something, but they mistakenly hand them a $100 bill, well, we wouldn't say that they were particularly generous because they did so without knowledge. They didn't know what they were doing. With the second condition, doing for its own sake, if someone gives money to charity in order to, say, get a tax write-off, or to look good for their, if they're running for office or to impress someone, they're not really generous. Because generosity isn't, spending money to look better or to enhance one's political position. That's not generosity. And finally, of course, in order to be generous, a person can't be just sort of like a random giver. Maybe like in the holidays or something, they give out a little extra, but they go back to being, say, stingy. We wouldn't say the person was generous. We would just say they were generous that one time. So those are the three conditions. You can know what they're doing, choose to do it for its own sake, and do so from a fixed and permanent disposition. And once someone has those, meets those three conditions, by doing various actions, according to Aristotle, they become virtuous. His next reply is distinguishing and acquiring, which is this. He says that acts are called just and temperate when they are such as a just or temperate person would do them. What makes the person doing them just or temperate is not acting, but acting as a just and temperate person does. And as he sees it, a person becomes virtuous by these virtuous acts, and there's no likelihood of becoming good by not doing them. So his view is basically, is crudely put, a person does things that are, say, virtuous-like. They're like being brave or like being musical. And then by doing these, they develop those qualities that actually enables them to engage in truly virtuous behavior or to engage in truly musical behavior. Now he closes this part by looking at an analogy to medicine, namely this. He notes that in the case of medicine, or in the case of philosophy, people often have a recourse to principles. They imagine they're philosophical, and so will become good. And he says this is analogous to someone who's sick or invalid, who listens to their doctor, all the words they say, and, listens to their prescriptions and so forth, but doesn't actually act on those instructions. So to use like an analogy, someone who listens to their doctor telling them to say stop smoking, cut out salt, and exercise more, but they never actually do that. And just as, someone who's unhealthy will benefit from simply hearing the doctor's words and listening but not doing them, someone who simply, listens to philosophy according to Aristotle won't actually gain any benefit. So again, this ties back to his view that ethics is a practical matter, which segues nicely into the next section, which is the question of putting it all into practice.